Leela Haynes was a respected Georgia sheriff, Carl Haynes was her charming husband, and Rosie was their quiet 9-year-old daughter, until one summer evening when Leela found them alone in a locked bedroom, and 10 gunshots shattered the illusion of a perfect family forever. Sheriff Leela Haynes had always been the pride of Waverly, a quiet town nestled among the forests of southern Georgia. With her dark uniform always crisp, her presence commanded respect in every room she entered. She wasn't just the law, she was the community's protector. Her path to leadership was built on years of hard work, unwavering discipline, and an unshakable belief in justice. Married to Carl Haynes for over a decade, Leela appeared to have everything a person could want. Carl, a tall man with an easy smile and a gentle voice, had built his own business in home renovations, and together, they raised their only daughter, Rosie. At 9 years old, Rosie was a curious, bright little girl who spent her time reading, drawing, or playing in the backyard under the old picken tree. To anyone looking from the outside, the Haynes family looked ideal. They had a well-kept home in a friendly neighborhood, a golden retriever that Rosie adored, and a holiday photo collection filled with laughter and matching outfits. But things had begun to shift in subtle ways. It started with Carl abruptly closing his business, citing stress and a desire to spend more time at home. Lila supported the decision at first, proud that he wanted to be more present in Rosie's life. But the change didn't bring warmth, it brought silence. Carl grew distant, often lost in thought, pacing around the house or watching television with a glazed expression. He rarely spoke to Lila unless it was necessary. Rosie, once bubbly and expressive, began to withdraw as well. Her laughter became less frequent. She began locking her bedroom door, something she never used to do. At first, Lila blamed the changes on the stress of growing up, or maybe even her own long hours at the department. Being a sheriff meant unpredictable schedules and late-night emergencies. Guilt crept in quietly. Maybe she had been away too often, maybe Carl was just overwhelmed being home all day. Still, something about the atmosphere in the house began to unsettle her. It was Rosie's schoolteacher who first voiced what Lila had tried not to acknowledge. During a parent-teacher conference, the teacher mentioned Rosie had become unusually withdrawn in class. She struggled to make eye contact, seemed anxious around adults, and had begun drawing disturbing images. One picture in particular stuck with the teacher. It showed a stick figure of a man inside a room, behind bars, with smaller figures outside crying. When asked about it, Rosie said only that she didn't like the sounds at night. Lila tried to laugh it off, blaming it on a scary movie Rosie might have overheard. But the image haunted her. It wasn't just the drawing. It was the way Rosie's hands trembled while folding it up. That same week, Lila noticed something that chilled her. While folding laundry, she found Rosie's shirt, one of her favorites, torn at the neckline. She asked Carl what had happened. He shrugged, said kids roughhouse, even with themselves. But Rosie wasn't the roughhousing type. Lila's instincts, the same ones that helped her solve cases, kicked in. There were too many small things that didn't sit right, too many odd moments passed off as nothing. Still, the idea that something was truly wrong felt too dark to fully face. She decided to install a hidden camera in the living room, one of the only places Rosie and Carl spent time alone when she was out. Just for her peace of mind, she told herself. Just to quiet the whispering in her head. And yet, even as she mounted the small camera behind a photo frame, a deep unease filled her chest. She had sworn to protect others from evil, but now she feared it may have found its way into her own home. The days following the installation of the hidden camera felt longer than usual. Lila found herself checking her watch constantly while on patrol, thinking about what was happening back home. She told no one about the camera, not even her closest colleague at the sheriff's office. She justified it as a precaution, something any mother would do. But deep down, she feared what she might find. That fear grew heavier each night she reviewed the footage on her laptop in the privacy of her office, heart pounding as she hit play. At first, the recording showed nothing out of the ordinary. Carl watched TV, made lunch, sat with Rosie during her homework. But there was something strange in his body language. He hovered too closely, stood behind her just a moment too long, placed his hands on her shoulders in a way that made Lila's stomach tighten. Rosie never pulled away outright, but there was a stiffness in her posture, like she was holding her breath. Still nothing was definitive. Lila told herself she was imagining things. interpreting every movement through a distorted lens of worry. But the next video she watched changed everything. Carl was sitting on the couch. Rosie stood in front of him, holding something, maybe a drawing. Carl reached out and pulled her into his lap. She squirmed lightly, but didn't fight. He whispered something in her ear. She tried to stand, and he tightened his grip. There was no sound, but Leela saw it. The tension, the fear. She shut the laptop abruptly and stared at the wall for a long time, her hands trembling. The next morning, she took Rosie to a therapist in a neighboring county, far from where anyone might recognize them. She told Rosie it was just someone to talk to, someone who could help with the bad dreams. After a 2-hour session, the therapist emerged with a concerned look. She explained gently that Rosie had described feelings of discomfort, of being touched when she didn't want to be. Nothing explicit. Nothing that would hold in court, but enough to set alarm bells ringing. Leela requested a forensic interview, but her position as sheriff complicated matters. She couldn't conduct the investigation herself, and local authorities were hesitant to get involved in a case so close to their own department. Bureaucratic delays piled up. Every day felt like a week. She began sleeping on the floor in Rosie's room, pretending it was a fun sleepover. Rosie didn't question it. She simply curled beside her mother, wrapping small arms around her neck like she didn't want to let go. The silence in the house became unbearable. Carl continued moving through his routines like nothing was wrong. He made dinner, joked with neighbors, mowed the lawn. But behind closed doors, Leela saw it differently. His smiles looked forced. His glances toward Rosie lingered too long. Her own thoughts felt poisoned with suspicion, but the pieces kept adding up, too many to ignore. She went back through the camera's footage, this time scanning older files. What she found was a mosaic of discomfort. Small gestures, repeated patterns, Rosie flinching under his touch, her eyes darting toward corners, her posture retreating whenever Carl was near. No single clip was proof. But the collective weight of it painted a picture Leela couldn't deny. Her nights grew darker, sleepless. Her gun felt heavier on her hip. She walked through the house with quiet footsteps, as if something dangerous lurked behind every door. Her instincts screamed that Rosie was in danger, that time was running out. But the law she had upheld for so long told her to wait, to gather evidence, to let the process unfold. She no longer believed the process would be enough. Leela sat alone in her patrol car one evening, parked just down the street from her house. She watched the porch light flicker on as night settled in. Through the window, she could see shadows moving, Carl and Rosie, going about their evening routine. But to her, nothing felt routine anymore. The air seemed thicker, time slower. Every second that passed without action felt like a betrayal of her instincts. She had served the law with loyalty for years, believed in the system, but now, faced with the possibility that her daughter was being hurt in her own home, all those beliefs started to crack. She replayed the therapist's words in her mind. There are signs. She's not ready to speak everything yet, but she's scared. Something is happening. Leela had tried to stay composed then, nodding, asking professional questions. But inside, something had shifted. A new kind of rage stirred in her. Not the explosive kind she'd seen in domestic calls or bar fights, but a quiet, boiling fury that never left her chest. It followed her everywhere, while writing reports, directing traffic, or sitting silently in briefings. She barely spoke unless spoken to. At home, she became hyper-aware of every moment. She watched Carl's movements with precision. How his hand brushed Rosie's hair too slowly. How Rosie would suddenly stop playing when Carl entered the room. There was no laughter anymore, only stillness. Leela began keeping her service weapon close even when off duty. She told herself it was just habit, but deep down she feared needing it. Each night she reviewed footage and scribbled notes. Dates, times, behaviors. But she knew the courts wouldn't see what she saw. There were no bruises, no confessions, no screams caught on tape. Just subtle moments, patterns only a mother could decipher. And still, the process dragged. The forensic interview had been scheduled, postponed, then rescheduled again. Weeks passed. Rosie grew quieter. One afternoon, Rosie came home from school with a smudge of dirt on her face and tears already drying on her cheeks. When Leela asked what happened, Rosie muttered something about tripping on the playground. But her eyes never met her mother's. Later that night, when Leela checked her backpack, she found a note, written in a messy scrawl. "I don't want him in my room anymore." The words punched through her chest. There it was, plain as day. Still no evidence the law could use. But to Leela it was enough. That note sat in her palm like a final warning. Something had to change and fast. She began setting traps in her mind. Strategies for removing Carl without tipping him off. Could she send Rosie to stay with a friend? Could she confront him without violence? But every possibility felt weak. Carl had always been clever with his words, calm under pressure. If she accused him without clear proof, he'd deny it, twist it, make her seem paranoid. Worse, he might take Rosie and disappear. The final straw came on a quiet Sunday evening. Leela came home earlier than planned. She walked in without making a sound, hoping to catch a moment of peace. But what she saw instead was Carl, seated on the edge of the bed, with Rosie standing stiffly beside him. His hand rested on her back, too low, lingering. They hadn't seen her yet. In that moment, the years of discipline, of protocol, of waiting for justice to arrive through proper channels, it all collapsed. Leela's world narrowed to that single room, that single scene, and she knew there would be no more waiting. Leela moved without sound, her footsteps light as she climbed the stairs. Her heart pounded, not from fear, but from certainty. There was no longer any doubt, no voice in her head second, guessing what she saw or felt. At the top of the stairs, she paused. The bedroom door was slightly ajar, allowing a narrow view of the room inside. Her hand rested on her service pistol, fingers curling tightly around the grip. Inside, Carl sat on the bed, turned slightly toward Rosie, who stood with her arms close to her sides, eyes wide and unmoving. The television buzzed faintly in the background, playing some daytime sitcom that nobody was watching. Carl leaned forward and said something, his hand slowly brushing against Rosie's back again. Rosie took a small step away but didn't speak. That was all Leela needed to see. She pushed the door open with one hand, weapon already raised in the other. Carl looked up, startled, mouth opening but no words coming out. Leela's arms didn't shake. Her breathing slowed. She took one measured step forward, locked eyes with him, and fired. The first bullet struck his chest. He fell backward against the bed, arms flailing. The second shot hit his shoulder, the third his abdomen. She kept firing, again and again, each pull of the trigger releasing a piece of the torment that had built inside her over the past weeks. Her training disappeared, replaced by the primal instinct to eliminate the threat in front of her. Carl stopped moving after the seventh shot, but Leela didn't stop. 3 more followed in rapid succession until the room fell silent, smoke rising gently from the muzzle of her gun. Rosie stood frozen, her mouth open but silent. Leela immediately dropped the gun and rushed to her daughter, pulling her into her arms. Rosie didn't cry. She didn't speak. She simply clung to her mother, burying her face in her shoulder. They sat together on the floor beside the bed, unmoving as the evening sun cast long shadows across the room. The neighbors heard the gunshots and called 911. Within minutes, patrol cars swarmed the quiet street. Officers entered the home cautiously, only to find their sheriff on the floor. Her uniform soaked in sweat, her expression hollow. Carl's body lay motionless on the bed, blood soaking the sheets and trailing down to the carpet. Leela didn't resist arrest. She stood slowly, her arms raised, as other officers moved in. Rosie was led out of the room gently by a female deputy, wrapped in a blanket, her eyes wide and vacant. The crime scene was unlike anything the town had ever witnessed. News spread quickly, first whispered through phone calls and text messages, then shouted from local headlines and TV broadcasts. A sheriff had shot her husband 10 times in their own home. No one knew the details. Speculation swirled like smoke. Some thought it was a domestic dispute. Others whispered about an affair. No one guessed the truth. Not yet. Leela was taken into custody and questioned by investigators from the Georgia Bureau of Investigation. She spoke plainly, recounting the moments as they unfolded, never crying, never apologizing. Her voice was calm but distant, as if retelling a story from someone else's life. The footage from the hidden camera was submitted as evidence. The note in Rosie's backpack was entered into the case file. The therapist's report, the interviews, the signs that had all been building. Everything now came into focus. But even with those pieces, what Leela had done couldn't be undone. 10 shots. A clean badge stained permanently with the truth that justice had come too late for it to follow the rules. Leela's trial never came. The district attorney reviewed the evidence and, after a thorough investigation, chose not to press charges. It wasn't a decision made lightly. The hidden camera footage, the therapist's report, and the quiet but clear statements from Rosie painted a horrifying picture. Though there was no single piece of evidence that clearly detailed the full extent of Carl's abuse, the pattern was unmistakable. The authorities concluded that Leila had acted to protect her daughter from immediate harm, in a moment where waiting even one more hour might have meant irreversible damage. Officially, the decision was categorized under the Castle Doctrine and parental defense. Unofficially, everyone knew that this case fell into a gray area, where the law ran out and instinct took over. But even with legal absolution, Leila didn't return to her old life. She resigned from the sheriff's department within the week, turning in her badge and service weapon without ceremony. Her resignation letter was one sentence long. "I can no longer enforce a system that failed my family." Her colleagues were divided. Some supported her, others questioned the message her actions had sent. The public, too, was torn. Some saw a mother who saved her child when no one else would. Others worried about the precedent, afraid of what it meant for due process and rule of law. Waverly was never the same after the shooting. The house stood empty for weeks, a silent reminder of the violence that had occurred behind its walls. Neighbors avoided walking past it. Eventually, a "for sale" sign appeared in the yard, but no one in town had any interest in buying it. It became a symbol of something the community didn't know how to talk about. Abuse that was hidden in plain sight, justice that came at the barrel of a gun. Rosie was placed in therapy and gradually began to open up more about what she had endured. It wasn't just physical, it was the fear, the manipulation, the secrets she had been too afraid to share. The process was long and painful. She stopped drawing for a while, she had trouble sleeping. But with her mother now constantly by her side, she slowly began to rebuild her sense of safety. Leila and Rosie eventually moved away. No one knew where they went, not even her former deputies. She left no forwarding address, no farewell message. Just gone. Some said she moved north. Others believed she changed her name and started over somewhere far from Georgia. It didn't matter. She had done what she believed was right. And now she needed to protect her daughter in a new way, by giving her a fresh start. In the years that followed, the story faded from headlines, but it never left the minds of those who had lived in Waverly. Teachers paid closer attention to the quiet students. Neighbors asked more questions. And somewhere, in a quiet place where no one knew their past, a mother and daughter tried to find peace. Leila no longer wore a uniform, but she still carried the weight of justice with her every day. She knew she had taken a life, someone she once loved. But in the end, she had chosen Rosie over everything else, even the law she had sworn to uphold. Some called it murder, others called it survival. Only Leila knew the truth. She hadn't wanted to be a hero. She had only wanted to be a mother who didn't wait 1 second too long.